back to another edition of Civil Discussion on GNAT-TV. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Friday, July the 7th. Also a great pleasure to be joined by our co-host, Don Keelan. Don, good to have you back.
Andrew, good to be here.
All right. And it's also great to be joined by our special guest today, Rabbi Michael Cohen, who is well known, I'm sure, to many of our viewers. But for those of you who may not know Rabbi Michael, he became the first full-time rabbi in the history of the Israel congregation in Manchester back in 1990. And since 2000, he has been dividing his time between Vermont and the Arava Institute in Israel, where he works with future Arab and Jewish leaders to cooperatively solve the region's environmental challenges. Rabbi Michael has also been a faculty member at Bennington College's Advancement for Public Action since the spring of 2012, and where he has taught classes on conflict resolution as well as others. And so that is what has brought him here today to our program, where we talk about conflict resolution a lot. Anyway, Rabbi Michael, welcome, and thank you for making the time for this conversation.
Good to be back, Andrew and Don. It's been a while, but it's good to be back.
Yeah, well, the last time you were on one of our cameras was back in the good old days on Lincoln Avenue.
Exactly, yeah.
Not that we want to date ourselves or anything like that. But,
yeah, that's fine.
Anyway. Well, yeah, so conflict resolution is a big part of what Don and I talk about here on our program, where we've had several guests on where we talk about civil discussion and ways of doing that, breaking that down. What are the elements where we can sort of talk to people who are on perhaps other sides of ideological fences than we may be? How do we kind of have a conversation where we don't wind up pointing fingers at each other at the end? We've talked about a couple of different specific subject areas, but I was wondering, just to kind of get us started today, if you could describe a little bit about what you teach at Bennington College in terms of conflict resolution. How do you approach that subject with your college students?
So the primary class I teach is called Intro to Conflict Resolution Theory and Practice. And what I do is I front load about 25 or so conflict resolution theories. I actually have a piece that I put together called Conflict Resolution Theory Guide that would list, because I couldn't find them. They're like scattered, so I've created this document and I add to it all the time because I'm always discovering new conflict resolution theories. And the best is, as the students take the class, some of them come with their own theories, and I add them right in there. And what's really exciting is to see, like, 2 years later, I also teach this course at BBA where they get Bennington College credit, where like a BBA student will quote a Bennington student's theory or vice versa. Mm-hmm. So it's constantly evolving and growing, and I'm always happy to make it available to anyone who wants it, because when I start the class, I always say, unfortunately, well, I think this class is important. It's even more important this year. And I have to say that every year, because in many ways I think we should have a K through 12 curriculum worldwide, culturally sensitive, where we teach this. Because we deal with conflict all the time, and there's some good aids out there to how to deal with it, and it should be part of what we learn growing up and in our lives. So that's kind of how I begin the course. One on my bucket list for when I retire, should I ever retire, is to write at least 2 children's stories based upon some of these theories. So hopefully that will see the light of day. So I front load some 25 or so conflict resolution theories, and then we start looking at the issue of the environment, the issue of the media, the Arab-Israeli conflict, racism, through the lenses of these different theories. At Bennington, students often do what's called a reflection, because they write a 2 or 3 page essay where they reflect what they've learned, and so I offer that in the class early on. But what I also do is, and this is based on one of the theories of Ellis Boulding, you need to use kind of the other side of our head, not just the analytical, but the more creative. So I say you can write a 2 or 3 page reflection if you want, or write a poem, a rap, a song, do a photograph, and reflect that way. And the stuff I get, a lot of students will choose that, and the stuff I get back is just phenomenal. And at the end of the semester, they have to take a conflict that either has taken place or imaginative, or is taking place now. It could be personal, international, national, and present an analysis of the conflict using these theories. And also during this semester, there's a presentation they use either looking at a song or work of art that either was about conflict or caused conflict, and then look at it through these lenses as well. So that's kind of what that class is made up of. And then I've also done the dual narrative in the Arab-Israeli conflict, and then I also do a lot of classes on Bible and religion and the environment as well.
Why is it that there's a conflict resolution is so prominent today? Where was it 50 years ago when we had conflicts?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, no.
And I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No.
How are conflicts resolved years ago, as opposed to how they're being attempted to be resolved today?
Yeah, in some ways, I'm not sure we've incorporated all of. I mean, in some ways, conflict resolution as a academic arm of college and of thinking is really post World War II. How much it's filtered into how we resolve conflicts, mega conflicts, I'm not sure we've integrated it enough, actually. I mean, pieces of it are there, but I think we're still resolving conflicts the way we've been resolving conflicts for a long time, which is either through you have a war and the winner wins and the loser loses, and negotiated conflicts to end those are not as prevalent as they should be, I would argue.
I'm thinking of the the Easter Sunday peace treaty. You know where I'm coming from.
Go, please.
Between Northern Ireland and I believe the British and Ireland and so forth, and how that got resolved. And obviously that was a conflict that had generations of issues. Are some of the theories that you're teaching today came out of what may have transpired back then?
I mean, so the Good Friday Accords that we just celebrated their 25th anniversary a couple of months ago is just a great example of applying those theories, but what it's really doing is going to what's perceived as being kind of a larger conflict, is going to the actual people and the grassroots. But the Good Friday Accords, and actually Senator Leahy was a major piece of this when he established the International Fund for Ireland. And what that did, it pushed a lot of money towards economic cooperation between Catholics and Protestants and people-to-people programs, civil society between Protestants and Catholics. And there's no question that cleared the way, paved the way, created the conditions so the Good Friday Accords could agree. Now, in terms of my work with, between Israelis and Palestinians, it becomes, for me, that's the way out. And what's interesting is, in terms of conflict, we had the Congress passed the Nita Lowey Middle East Peace Partners Act 3 years ago, $50 million for each of the next 5 years for doing exactly that between Israelis and Palestinians. And it was bipartisan, and they even named it after Nita Lowey as she was leaving Congress, which says a lot. But here's the difference. In Northern Ireland, we were using $40 per capita for this kind of work. Between Israelis and Palestinians now, even with MEPA, it's only $2. And part of what we need to do is create an international, may not be an international fund, but get the international community really revving up. Because at the end of the day, what was missing between Catholics and Protestants, what's missing between Israelis and Palestinians right now is trust. If you don't trust anybody, there's no way you can go forward. And we see that at the Arava Institute, where we bring Israelis and Palestinians and Jordanians together, and Moroccans, and one of the things we're able to build is trust. And I could go into details about that if you're interested, but when you trust somebody, you can still vehemently disagree with them, but you can imagine going forward to try to solve something. When there's no trust, that becomes impossible. And that's a theory that was really put into place in Northern Ireland that we need to also do between Israelis and Palestinians. And I would argue it goes back into the United States. We've lost a lot of trust here in terms of the conversations, the non-conversations that we don't have.
Now, we had someone on the show who talked about the Northern Ireland issue. Was it Amanda? Or maybe the folks from the Better Angels? Where in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, one of the issues that could have blown the deal completely off the table was watching the Northern Ireland or the IRA destroy their weapons, and they did not want the other group to be watching them do that, because they, one of the what's very important in conflict resolution is not to embarrass the other side.
Right.
So,
right.
If you can just help us with that a little bit. Do you see that in the issues that you work with, where things don't get as far as they should get because, again, what you bring up is trust. It's not being enforced enough. It's not being emphasized enough, I should say.
And you need to consciously try to build it. And then if you trust somebody, you're also not going to embarrass them. I mean, that's a piece of the puzzle. What's interesting, part of it, and this goes back to something you asked earlier, is how do you start these conversations? Where you perceive like this major gap between two sides? So one of the theories we'll look at, it's called positions, interest, needs, or PIN. So think of two triangles that overlap. So you've got the two positions here that are separate with this huge gap in between. But over here, there's a little bit of an overlap of the triangles, and then down here even a larger. Separate positions, you've got a bit overlap of interests and even a greater overlap of needs, right? So you begin the conversation with something you share. Needs or interests, which also, if you know the needs and interests of either side, you better understand why they've reached their position. So it does two things. One, you better understand the other, but you also find something that you both share. And you start the conversation there. And the other thing is, is about long-term engagements. John Lennon saying instant karma's going to get you, God bless him, but it's not. It's long, hard work. And in conflicts that have been going on for a long time, even more so. But that's the other piece. That if you're really going to be effective at this, you've got to be willing to engage for a long period of time, and with a lot of patience.
I was wondering, as you look around the contemporary American political scene right now, I mean, we hear constantly about the conflict and lack of trust, and people who just can't seem to kind of begin to kind of get to first base with each other in terms of saying, okay, well, I understand why you feel that way. I may not agree with you, but I get it. That piece of understanding the other person's point of view seems to be a very hard climb for a lot of folks here now, and I'm sure that's probably the case in a lot of countries. But I guess I just wonder, what do you think? Was there a point in our recent past where we kind of went from being able to kind of be, okay, well, I get it. They think that way, and that's okay, no problem. To where, this person who may have a different point of view is suddenly like on the dark side.
Yeah, I think we need to look at history, and as bad as things are now, they've been this bad before. I mean, we've had periods within our political structure where it was pretty brutal and nasty, and we got through it. I would argue the difference now is this, for better and for worse. We live in the best and the worst of Marshall McLuhan's global village, and we haven't figured out that. That's just added a whole new dimension of speed, of autonomy, that is added a layer that when we go to these unhealthy moments of how we have civics in this country, we haven't figured this out. And speaking of civics, I think that's one piece we don't teach civics enough, or the way that we used to. That there's a process, there's a system, there's a way to disagree, it's okay to disagree. One of the things that I love in the Talmud, these great rabbinic discussions about Jewish law and the Bible, rabbis were paired together who disagreed with each other consciously. Because when you're paired with Rav and Shmuel, Hillel and Shammai, when you're paired together with someone who you disagree with, one, you may learn you're wrong, they may learn they're wrong. You might learn how to fine-tune your argument, or you may see a compromise come out of it. And there's a relationship that's built there. And we certainly know that there's less and less of that within Washington today, where members of Congress spend way less time together, and in some ways, if they do, they're considered a traitor by the other side. And we have to change that, and that culture trickles down to all of us.
Well, you and I have talked about this, how back, I'm a little bit older, but how back in the 60s, we had the civil rights debate going on, which is terrible in many places. And then we had, right on top of it, we had the Vietnam War. And then President Johnson introduced another program, the Great Society, Great Society, War on Poverty and so forth. And all of that was the debates. But you're absolutely right. What we had back then was people did talk. And then I'll go back another 10 years before that when I was in Washington back in the late 50s. Right? The politicians stayed in Washington. They met. All right, and we didn't have the interstate, so they couldn't get home by car, nor did we have the jet travel.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know that because I used to see them come up to Camp David from different parties, meeting with Eisenhower, meeting with the leaders. How do you join a debate? And I'll use the. Let's say I disagree with the way Israel is behaving, or not behaving, with their government policy on the West Bank regarding building housing. Without someone saying, and because you brought this up a little bit, without someone accusing me, well, Don, you're anti-Semitic. You're against Israel. Well, no, I'm not. I just happen to. That's a policy.
Right.
And how do we distinguish the policies of the government from the policies of the Jewish religion? I mean, I have nothing. I'm not debating the Jewish religion. I'm debating a policy of a country that I happen to disagree with, just like I would disagree with France on something or England on something. Right? How do you? Because some people are afraid to speak up.
Right.
And I just pick on that. I could pick on now this program coming out of California on reparations. If I begin to talk about that, am I a racist? Because I happen maybe not to agree with it, or not to agree with parts of it. And you can pick any topic, and because we label people.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. So first of all, I would say, when it comes to Israel, for example, I criticize Israel all the time. The question is, where is somebody coming from? And unfortunately, where the criticism of Israel has become complicated, because Israel is the Jewish state, and there is a meme out there, unfortunately, from thousands of years of Jews being picked on, that the fact that the United Nations has condemned Israel 15 times a year, and all the other countries of the world combined, 16, like China maybe once. I mean, that there's an overbearing on Israel, and it comes from this permission, and so that's where that can sometimes get dark and dangerous. It doesn't mean Israel shouldn't be criticized. They absolutely should, but it's where's the person coming from, and that's a whole other long discussion there. I mean, what we need to reclaim is, you were talking about dating yourselves. I remember, William Buckley, Firing Line, right? The great conservative William Buckley had people on his show that he vehemently disagreed with, and there was a conversation. I sometimes wonder, and I talk about this actually in my class with the students, about presidential debates, right? And immediately there's the spin doctors. Who landed the knockout punch, right? As opposed to, why not a presidential dialogue? Sit at a table together. Let's have a conversation. They can still make their points, but it's trying to make this country a better place that is only going to come through dialogue. And so let's model that, and not have debates where you're going to score the knockout punch, but where there's a real conversation. People can see, we're supposed to talk about this. And maybe there's something valid in what you said, or valid in what you said, or what I said. And that's what we need to start modeling. The other thing is, I'm a big proponent of study abroad for college students. I did it myself. I did a 2-year solo trip around the world. I've been involved in it through Aravaz, a study abroad program for people from here. And I'm pushing it all the time on campus. But I also say, particularly, Bennington College, which is, very left-wing politically, I think, do a semester abroad, but then do a semester like at Liberty, University, like a very, very different college with a very, very different student body, with a very, very different outlet, and expose yourself. I do tell my students that, and one of the benefits of these things, they should have 5 news sources from across the political spectrum on their phones. And when there's an issue that comes up, go see what those different voices say. Often when I've told my students, when I drive, listen, and I've also said, no teacher is objective. And if you pretend you're objective, you're not. No one's objective. I said, it's pretty clear where I am politically, left of center, or progressive, whatever. But I think it's really important to have our strong opinions, but always be open to hear the other. and to understand them. So often when I drive to Bennington College, I turn on right-wing radio. It's not where I am politically, but it's really important that I hear and try to understand where they're coming from and what their thinking is. And we've got to give permission not to be so quick to judge, but to understand. Becca Ballant, our wonderful new member of Congress, her slogan was courage and kindness. I mean, we need to have courage of our convictions, but we need to be kind in how we deal with each other. And there's a model there. We have our new member of Congress, and that's what she's modeling. And I know what she's doing, she's reaching across the aisle in the same way Congressman Welch did when he was in the House as well.
And I'm not sure if you were there at the event where Becca Ballant was at the Wilburton Inn. Was it last week or a week or two ago? And she talked about one of her first days in Congress and trying to have breakfast with a Republican colleague. And when they found that she was a Democrat, they kind of freaked out and went, "What are you doing here?" kind of thing. And that was interesting, I thought, hearing that discussion and eventually them able to have a conversation together. So it is possible.
It is.
But what strikes me a lot, you're talking about the presidential debate and it seems to be right now it's so much about power. It's like who's going to win the election, and it's not about and I don't want to kind of think back. 40 or 50 years ago when George Aiken and Everett Dirksen and Howard Baker were running things. They were able to have conversations like that. They probably were just as concerned about being in charge as Mitch McConnell is right now, or for that matter, Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer. But it seems like nowadays it really is all about who's going to win and who's going to lose, as opposed to is this idea make sense or not. And I think the whole recent discussion in Congress around the debt ceiling was a really good example about that. Yeah, of course everyone realizes the country can't spend more than it takes in. But to run us up against the wall of an economic catastrophe wasn't the way to solve that problem.
Yeah. So I see we're running out of time, so I do want to say one, or more than one thing. But part of, I think, why we're also in the state that we're in right now is that things look so bad. And when things look bad, people aren't at their best. And there are a lot of serious challenges that we face in the world today. But I think we need a broader picture. There's two really interesting books. So one is Steven Pinker from Harvard, The Better Angels of Our Nature, where he's documented that violence has gone down, people are living longer, that there's actually a lot of good. If you look at the arc of human history, a lot of good is happening. And then this is a really interesting book, Humankind, A Hopeful History by Rutger Bregman. Now, we all grew up, or many of us grew up reading the book Lord of the Flies, right? And that's a model of humanity, right? That's what we are. So Bregman actually heard about a real Lord of the Flies story, somewhere also in the South Pacific, where a group of boys were abandoned somehow on an island, so their ship had sunk or whatever, long story short. Eventually, they're rescued, and what does the captain find there? A society of cooperation. The complete opposite of Lord of the Flies. And so Bregman was really interested in that. So he delves deep and tries to look at human history. And he comes with this book, Humankind, A Hopeful History, that we are only here because when we're kind to each other and because when we cooperate, when we work together. And that's a mega narrative that gets pushed aside by all the violence. There's something called the asymmetry of the sensational. Something bad happens and it's the headlines. And if it happens again, it's still the headlines. Well, it needs to be reported, but if something good happens, like the Arv Institute, and if we get reported, they're not going to report on us for months afterwards, right? There's an asymmetry there. Bad is much easier at having an influence than good in this dynamic. And so we need to, and part of it, we're only reading about the bad. So in Hebrew, the word for truth is emet. It's more or less the first, middle, and last letter of the Hebrew alphabet because truth is all encompassing. Sheker, which is lie, are three Hebrew letters together, shin, kuf, resh. A lie just gives you part of the picture. So if you're only being given part of the picture, which is it's all bad, it's all doom and gloom, and I'm not saying it doesn't give it, but that's all you're being given. You're being told a lie, actually. And that becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy that just draws people down, that doesn't put us at our best. which is an underpinning of how do we have these conversations. So that's a mega piece that I think we also need to look at when we're trying to figure out how do we resolve conflict. Are we creating the conditions so people can have those conversations and have those dialogues in their interactions?
I like what the rabbi said earlier, emphasize the positive. And there are a number of things that have, and I think this is what you've been bringing out now too. It's not all negative.
And we need to confront the negative. I'm not saying we need to push it aside. And when I teach my course and we get to the environment, because what's happening to the climate and just the environment in general can just seem overwhelming. And at the end of every year, a lot of environmental organizations print their successes. And it's so important that first we know about them, so we learn from how to be successful when it comes to the environment, but we also drink and feed our souls from something positive, because that climb, it's so steep if that's all that we can look at. And that's why it's so important that we also feed ourselves with that other message and hold them both,
Can you imagine being in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1935 with the Dust Bowl? I'm thinking, we have a major depression going on for 3 years. With 6 more years of it to go before World War II. But you're in the middle of the Midwest, and there's nothing but dust. So, are we done? Are we getting close?
Well, we was trying to think just one more quick question before we have to run here. And I guess I just wondered, at the Arava Institute in Israel, I mean, it must be kind of interesting to see Arabs and Israelis get together and across a divide that is really visceral, work together on solutions for an environmental problem that what there is face. How does that work? I mean, is it easy for these couple of guys, or?
Yeah, yes, I mean, one of the things is if you're going to bring people together in combat, you have to be intentional of how you do it, which we're very good at. And we've learned. I mean, we've been doing this for 26 years. And part of it is you can't just bring people together who are in conflict. Wow, that actually hurts, right? So we have other touch points. They're cooking together, they're hiking together, taking classes together. They have these other touch points where they get to meet each other as human beings. We have these sessions, these dialogue sessions, where they go at it. And they will say things that need to be said that neither side wants to hear. And they will leave those sessions angry, crying, and an hour later they're in the communal kibbutz dining room having dinner together and laughing. An hour later there are a bunch of pieces that we put in place that allows that to happen, where we also see these amazing long-term personal professional relationships coming out. And actually I'm going to be in Washington next week. We're bringing 20 Israelis and Palestinians, many alum of the Institute, who have been working on the climate crisis all year long, and they're going to be going to Washington next week. Again, when you trust somebody, if you can build the conditions to build trust, you can still have these vehement disagreements, but figure out a way to go forward.
Rabbi, let me interrupt you,
Sure.
because I know we're running out of time. How are they then perceived when they go back home?
It varies, with some, and whether it's Israelis or Palestinians or Jordanians, some see, wow, what you did is really important and really brave, and others think, you're a sucker, like you're a fool to do this. I will tell this story, and I've heard this over and over again for 26 years now, from the first year. A Jordanian comes, they may be under pressure not to come by their family, by their friends. They come, and one of the nice things on weekends, people get to go to Israel, Palestine, and Jordan with all of their schoolmates. So they go back to Jordan with their American and Israeli Jewish classmates to their Jordanian family, and the family falls in love with these students. At the end of the day, they're in the kitchen, usually it's with their mother washing dishes, who says to them, and I've heard this more than once, wow, I learned I have more in common with the Israeli Jew than the American Jew. Yeah, they live in the Middle East just like you do. And that's what we're able to do there. That's
a great point.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there.
Yeah, I know.
We could talk for another half an hour, I think, quite easily about all of this. But again, Rabbi Michael Cohen, thank you very much for making the time to be with us
and
today.
good luck in Washington.
Thanks.
Thinking about all of this, and and thanks to all of you for sharing part of your day with us as well. Hope you found the program interesting, and we'll see you again the next time. Meanwhile, have a great day. Thanks again.